Brand new cards were revealed from Japan. They look super cool. Exciting stuff. Two new A-Spec cards were revealed from the set that we'll be getting in North America in March. And these are the translations courtesy of Tuan Lei. Here we have Neo Superior Energy, which is an A-Spec card. And now A-Spec cards, let's just do some quick debriefing here. A-Spec cards have a clause on them that say you can only have one A-Spec card in your deck. So it's like Radiant Pokemon, or if you were around for Prism cards, or if you were around for A-Specs the first time they did them. Well, A-Specs are back. So here we have Neo Superior Energy. When attached to a Pokemon, this card provides one colorless energy. If this card is attached to a Stage 2 Evolution Pokemon, it provides 2 energy of any type instead. Overall, it's kind of like a double rainbow energy, but only on a Stage 2 Pokemon, and you can only have one A-Spec in your deck. So this has to be better for your deck than every other A-Spec that exists. But here comes the problem. The other A-Spec they revealed is Prime Catcher. Switch one of your opponent's benched Pokemon with their active, and if you do, switch your active with one of your benched Pokemon. It's essentially the supporter card Guzma from Burning Shadows. And this is an item card. It's a catcher, like Gust of Wind, Pokemon Catcher, whatever you want to call it, but with no coin flip, no requirement like Counter Catcher, no requirement to have 2 cards like Custom Catcher or Cross Switcher, and it's not a supporter like Boss's Orders or Guzma or any of the Gust effects. So this is incredibly strong, and this has sparked a 13-part thread from Twitter aficionado and Pokemon enthusiast Jake Gearhart. Now, you might know Jake Gearhart because this was the person who said that Iron Hands EX was going to ruin the game, and that didn't happen. But let's not act like that's the only thing he's done. Jake Gearhart created the PokeGear.app website software that a lot of people use. He also just plays the game. He's not a villain or anything of the community. He just cried Iron Hands EX and said that the game was ruined, and it wasn't. But this time, he might be onto something. Jake says, a major problem with forced one-off cards like A-Specs is the issue of prizing them and finding them in general. The original A-Specs sidestepped this issue somewhat as the most powerful ones were generic consistency cards. It didn't really matter when you found them. So the best A-Specs, the most used A-Specs in competitive play the first time that A-Specs came around in the XY era, or in the black and white era, were computer search, discard 2 cards and search for any card, and dowsing machine, discard 2 cards and put a trainer card from your discard into your hand. So these were really, really, really good cards. These were just about every deck played either computer search or dowsing machine, based on, does your deck need to find a single card more often, or does your deck need to get back a trainer card more often? So these were typically like 90% or more of decks chose between these 2 A-Specs as their A-Spec of choice. The same way in today's game, most decks play either Radiant Greninja or Radiant Charizard, and then all of the other Radiant Pokemon are used a very, very small amount. Jake goes on to say, in part 2 of his 13-part thread, the tool A-Specs, however, did cause issues. A huge portion of the Virizion Genesect archetype's power was locked behind finding G-Booster. G-Booster was a tool card that said the Genesect EX this card is attached to can use the attack on this card. So this was a very specific card. G-Booster was an attack that did 200 damage, and 200 damage back then was just as good as 300 damage now. Discard 2 energy, this damage isn't affected by any effects on the defending Pokemon. So you just got this super attack that just blew up anything pretty much. But like Jake says, a huge portion of this archetype's power was locked behind finding the G-Booster. And then Life Dew, the other example for Sableye Garbodor, which was a kind of a control deck where you wanted your Sableyes to always have a Life Dew on them. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out, your opponent takes 1 fewer prize card. So essentially, they would just never take prizes off the Sableye unless they could remove the tool, then KO the Sableye. Back in 2014, the format was slow enough that Virizion Genesect could spend their supporter for the turn on just a Skyla to fetch the G-Booster, or a town map to help take it out of the prizes. Skyla, search your deck for a trainer card, which could get G-Booster, or town map. Turn all of your prize cards face up. Then eventually you take your first knockout, you find the G booster, and then you have it for the rest of the game. The format in 2024 isn't shaping up to be anywhere near as forgiving with time. And that's very true. You know, we're in a fast format with single, 2, and 3 prize Pokemon around. We have some very aggressive decks like Fusion Mew, Miraidon, Roaring Moon. Even Charizard is pretty aggressive on turn 2, dealing 180 with a 330 HP Pokemon, something the game did not see anything close to back then when these original Ace specs were released. Both of the Ace specs we've seen so far are play unlocking cards, as Jake puts it. More similar to G-Booster and Life Dew than they would be compared to Computer Search and Dowsing Machine. That is, except for Prime Catcher's generic usability. So this card, this is the problem, Jake is saying, because this card is generally usable, and, you know, a free catcher on an item card effect with no requirements. You can use this on turn 1, you can use this on turn 5, you can use this in a single prize deck, you can use this in a VMAX deck. It's very, very generally usable. That is the problem. Not only is Prime Catcher a play unlocking card that's great in every deck, Jake says it's also great the entire game. Comparing it now to a card like Scramble Switch, which is good in most decks at any time, but it's most effective late game when you have more energy in play, you've already taken prize cards. Scramble Switch was another Ace spec. Now, this was one of the... You'll see this included in 5% or less of decks Ace spec, but it was very, very good in that small niche of decks where Scramble Switch was more effective than Computer Search or Dowsing Machine or Life Dew or G-Booster. Scramble Switch was a switch card, and then you can move all energy attached to the old active Pokemon to the new active Pokemon. So this was good in a very small niche of decks. Prime Catcher, on the other hand, Jake says, is arguably strongest on the first turn of attacking, before you've taken any prize cards, where decks can rarely gust any other way. Many games are going to be decided by a player randomly finding it early, and prizing it can be disastrous. So this is the claim where this part might be an exaggeration, right? Jake says many games are going to be decided by a player randomly finding it early, and prizing it can be disastrous. Well, if you prize Prime Catcher, that just means you're going to have to use one of your other gusting effects. You're going to end up using Boss's Orders, or Counter Catcher, or Cross Switcher if you play those cards in your deck. It's not like this is an effect that's locked behind just this single card that was in the prize cards. So I don't fully agree with this part from Jake. And also, finding it early, I'm not sure that games are going to be so strongly decided by a player randomly finding it early, because then the other player has a chance to respond by finding their Prime Catcher and using that strong effect, or using a Counter Catcher that is now activated, or just responding with a Boss's Orders to then gust up something that the opponent doesn't want knocked out. So I do agree that Prime Catcher is strongest on the first turn of attacking, where you can just go ahead and get that free gust knockout without needing to use boss, without needing to find a combo like Cross Switcher, without needing to be behind like Counter Catcher. And I do agree that Prime Catcher is great in every deck and great the entire game. I also agree with that. I'm not sure about this part where the first player to Prime Catcher is going to win, or the player who prizes Prime Catcher is now going to lose. That feels like an exaggeration. We're not done, though, with Jake's Twitter thread. Think about how powerful the Roxanne plus Path plus Counter Catcher plays are in Giratina decks. Imagine how much added randomness executing this critical play would involve if any of those pieces were forced to only be a one-of. Yes, they can be forced to be a one-of, because Prime Catcher's broken and we wouldn't want it to be more than a one-of. Making a combo play like that less reliable wouldn't result in Giratina cutting these cards altogether, because they're all good on their own, so the result would be just the same gameplay with more randomness forced. That's what we have to look forward to with Prime Catcher. See, here I think is where Jake's argument starts to fall apart, in my opinion, because we still have these same plays available. We still have the Counter Catcher plays, the Cross Switcher plays, the Boss's Orders plays, but now we have one more play that's obviously stronger, but harder to find because it is a one-off card at max copy one-off card. This is not my biggest problem with Prime Catcher right now. I've only known about this card for a few hours. It was just revealed. I saw it when I woke up today. That's not my biggest problem. Let's continue, and then I'll talk about my issue with it. You can think of this card like coin flip Pokemon Catcher. It's going to feel the same, except the randomness of a coin flip is replaced by the randomness of not prizing and finding the card. We already have Pokemon Catcher in format, right? But it's a coin flip, so very few decks play it. Prime Catcher does not need a coin flip, so it's so much stronger, but you can only find one of it. The game designers could have taken steps to alleviate this issue if they had recognized it. The most simple way would have again to be avoid generic play unlocking ace specs in favor of generic consistency focused ace specs to prevent the issue from affecting all decks. This is where Jake gets back on track, in my opinion, because I agree with this. We want there to be a big enough pool of ace specs so that we don't fall into the problem of Radiant Greninja. You know, maybe 70+% of decks play Radiant Greninja, and then about a quarter of decks play Radiant Charizard, and then the rest of the Radiants are almost obsolete. So that's what I would like to avoid if I was the person in Creatures designing these. I would want there to be computer search, dowsing machine, scramble switch, life dew. Okay, we have a nice selection of cards. You know, computer search is easy to toss in anything. Dowsing machine's kind of easy to toss in anything. Scramble switch and life dew, it gets a little more tricky to just toss into decks, but they're still good where they're good. Whereas what Jake is saying with Prime Catcher, and what I agree with that Prime Catcher is doing, is you could just put this in every deck, and it's good all game long, pretty much. The game designers recognized the issue with Radiant Pokemon in the past and printed Hisuian Heavy Ball, so my only hope is that they do something similar here. It'd make ace specs even more powerful, but at least they'd add less randomness to the game than they currently will. I don't think we need an ace spec finder. I do not think that. Another issue with the ace spec finder thing, that's where Jake loses me again. Another issue with forced one-ofs out of a pool of options is the tendency for a limited number of options to dwarf the other as in power level. Okay, we've seen this most recently with Radiant Pokemon. Greninja is by far the most played, and all their choices drop off in usage rapidly. Yeah, I also forgot to mention Radiant Alakazam is good in a couple decks that need to move damage around. So again, I completely agree here. The last part of this thread, Neo Upper Energy could have been a step in the right direction if other niche usage ace specs were printed alongside weaker generic ace specs like Master Ball. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. Instead, Prime Catcher is a high-powered generic card that will likely mirror the play rate of Radiant Greninja. I completely agree there. So is Jake doom posting again like he did with Iron Hands? So the last thing I'll look at here is Stefan Ivanov's tweet about this. Stefan is an international champion, esteemed player, writer, all-around great community figure. Stefan says, I'll wait until we know a bit more about the upcoming set to have a strong opinion about these new ace specs, but in the meantime, I tend to agree with Jake here. I do agree with at least half of the posts from Jake's Twitter thread here, but I encourage you to read it on your own, listen to what I had to say, and leave your comments in the comments down below. Sorry for this unedited video. Holidays time. I wanted to put this out there, but I didn't want to spend time writing a script because then it would just never get out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel. Check out my sponsors, affiliates, coupons down below. If you enjoy my content and you would like to support it, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.